Okay, it's ready, yeah.
So are you guys not allowed to sit through each other's?
Well, I don't know if allowed is the word. I mean, we just decided not to be more respectful that way. They had, you know, because if we'd sat through, if I
That's
sat
true,
through two
you
different
could.
ones, I would have known the questions in advance and stuff.
Yeah, see, I thought the questions were gonna be different. It would've been easier to have all three of you up
Here
here.
we
and
go.
ask
Stacie,
the
I'll
same
ever be.
Okay, Miss Stacie,
Couple of years old.
would you make any changes in priorities to our operating budget? And if so, what would you be willing to sacrifice to balance the adjustments? And do you support an annual audit?
That was like 3 questions at once.
I know, I did that.
Actually, I play a big part and I put a lot of input into the annual budget. As treasurer I did last year, I've got even more this year. I think there's places that we can cut corners. I think we need to look at efficiencies. You know, we'd all like to cut costs, but of course there are areas that, our electric bills are going up just like everybody else's are. So I think that, looking at needs versus wants is probably the best way to cut the costs.
Have you visited the fitness center lately? What is your point of view regarding the recent addition of new fencing for the pickleball courts and the proposed construction of additional courts in light of the fact that all of the fitness center equipment is antiquated and in dangerous disrepair?
I have not visited the fitness center, but I've been invited to visit the fitness center, but the person I was supposed to go with was not able to go. I do have a neighbor that uses it, and she has told me about the state of disrepair. This was actually on my budget wish list for this year. I think that one of the things we need to do is maintain what we have before we expand into other things, because at some point you're not going to be able to maintain what you have if you keep adding new things.
Do you agree that our maintenance department is performing poorly and needs new leadership? Green light.
Can I just leave it on and move?
Yes, you
Okay,
can.
okay, thank you. You know, I don't want to say performing poorly because I don't watch what they do on a day-to-day basis. Do I think that they could benefit from a little bit more accountability? Probably. I think across the board, we're looking at ways to find efficiencies and more accountability with all employees.
Would you consider working with the county to install a yellow blinking light on FM 2869 before entering the east and west sides, and consider lowering the speed limit to 40 miles per hour from 50 in this same area?
You know, I think that's a pretty good idea, but I know several years ago, right after we moved in, there was a huge thing, that initiative to get, you know, like caution lights down the street, and that took a lot of time. Do I see the need as traffic increases? I mean, there are times when it's really hard to pull out of that driveway, so it'd certainly be worth looking into.
Okay. How will you lead on correcting the ongoing issues with Lake Greenbrier? Repairs to drainage areas, dredging, etc. What would you propose for handling lowering the lake for dock maintenance? What type of timelines would you consider acceptable for such issues? I know that was 3 questions. I know.
That was a lot of questions, and I'm going to be completely and totally honest with you. I'm not a lake management expert. I rely on the reports from our biologists from TCEQ. You know, I have a background in accounting, finance, and that's where my strengths are. I do try to research things, but at this point, I can't give you a good answer on what a good timeline would be because I've never been faced with this before.
Good. What criteria would you use for allocation of board restricted funds?
I think, again, as I said earlier, I mentioned earlier, we need to look at needs versus wants and maintenance versus new amenities to the extent that we can. I mean, I think, unfortunately, we have several things around the ranch that are in disrepair, and these need to be brought up to where they need to be before we think about allocating funds for things like our roads, for instance. They need a lot of work. Our fitness center needs work. There are, several things, buildings in disrepair, and we need to take care of what we have before anything else.
Okay, I'm going to read a list of areas of expertise. Please answer yes or no in each area. Do you have experience or expertise in the following areas? Ready?
Okay.
Finance and accounting.
Yes, ma'am.
Communications and public relations.
Yes, ma'am.
Marketing and branding.
No.
Law enforcement.
I used to be married to a policeman. I don't know if that counts. I had some experience there because I know what he went through to get trained, and
There you go.
and I've done some research on the differences between TCOL training, which is what our law enforcement officers go through, and TOPS training, which is what our security officers go through. So I have some knowledge, but not a lot of.
Got it. How about processes and controls?
Yes, I've been a team leader for different types of groups and had to put processes and controls in place.
Management, accountability.
Yes.
Operations.
I wouldn't say expertise, no. Some experience, yes, but not expertise.
Multi-building asset management.
Multi-building asset management. No expertise there.
Negotiation.
I would say yes. I taught school
That's
for
what I was
quite
gonna say.
a while. I'm pretty good at negotiating.
There you go.
If I can teach 7th graders,
Yeah. Do you have any legal background?
no.
Okay. Describe your moral and ethical compass.
My moral and ethical compass. First of all, I'm a believer. I go to church, and I use Jesus Christ as my guide for all of my everyday decisions. Second of all, I believe in integrity, and integrity is that's it's on my signs if you've seen any of the signs. Integrity to me is honesty and doing the right thing. It also means to me that I know I'm going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. But when I make those mistakes, the first thing you have to do is you have to be willing to admit that you made a mistake. Then you have to apologize for making that mistake. And then you need to do what's necessary to try to get it right.
Okay, last question. Ready? Where do you see the board's responsibilities ending and the administration's responsibility beginning?
Okay, and that's a really good question. Now, with administration, I think that we hire people that are very qualified to do certain jobs, and the board, to some extent, is to oversee what they're doing, not to micromanage what they do on a day-to-day basis. We do have the final say-so on the budget when we're voting on that. We have input on these things, but this is a volunteer position, and in theory, it shouldn't take us 40 hours a week. But I do believe that if it turns out that we find that we don't have employees in place that we can trust to do what they're supposed to do, then it's up to us to try to rectify that.
Okay, I'm very sorry I missed the last one.
Of course.
Do you see any conflict of interest in the current board and administration, i.e. Jeff's dual compensation as GM and Golf Pro?
Okay, so I'm going to be as honest as I can, because when I first heard that as a resident, I thought, wow, how can he do both? So I can see where the perception is. But having worked with Jeff on a day-to-day basis and knowing the checks and balances that we have, he can't just go out and spend money on the golf course without approval from the board. I mean, it has to be budgeted just like everything else. It has to be requested. It has to be approved. So I can see where there might be a perception, but I don't believe that there is.
And this follow-up on this question is, why is Adam never available on Fridays?
Right now, I believe he's only working 4 days a week through the summer, but I'm not 100% sure.
That's what they told me. He's only working 4 days a week.
Okay, yeah.
He's not paid by the hour, is he?
No, he's not.
Got
But
it.
I'm just gonna be honest, I know Adam very well, and I've worked with him on a lot of projects. He can do in 8 hours what it would take a lot of people 16 hours to do.
Okay. Okay, questions from the audience? Questions from the audience?
I'll ask one.
Here.
We've already asked the other two, so we'll ask you.
That's
So
fine.
that
I'm gonna
everybody-
take a drink real quick.
Sure, go for it. It'll take me a minute to get it out of you. What are your feelings as far as this new land deal, since you're on the board already, to giving us an open forum so that we can ask questions?
I have said,
I'm
Before
sorry.
it's signed on the 8th.
Before it's signed, we would like an open forum. What are your feelings?
I am a firm believer that needs to happen.
Is
I've
it
made
going
that
to
very,
happen?
I do not know that for a fact, but I'm trying. I'm being honest with you.
It's only 5 days away.
What's 5 days away? I'm sorry.
The 8th, the vote.
The signature
Signing
of
the
the
contract.
contract.
What the land deal needs.
I
The land.
I don't think
I think I
that
saw
that date
meeting's
is
not
feasible
happening
at this
on
point, because we've gotten so much feedback and we have discussed as a board. I'm a firm believer, and I've said this before, I'm a firm believer that every question deserves an answer. And we got 20 pages of feedback on that land deal, and there are a lot of questions, so we're trying to work on a plan on how we can,
Transparency eliminates a lot of.
right, I
problems.
understand
So
that.
if there's an open forum to answer all of our questions, it may be a good deal, but until we get the answers, we don't know if it is.
Right,
So
and I
since you're
understand.
on the board, it's easier to ask.
Well,
them.
it is, but it's also, you're putting me in a position where you're asking me to tell things that other people don't know, and
I just want your thoughts on it.
you know, my thoughts are, I think we need to have one. I mean, if I had questions that I wanted answered, I would want to be able to ask them.
Keep in mind that she's in a position where if
Oh, I
there's
understand.
ongoing work, she really can't talk freely.
Yeah, and I understand that. I was financial officer on the
And-
board too. I understand where you're
Right.
coming from.
And I'm not trying to skirt any questions, I'm not, I
No,
just
you're
feel
not.
like I have to, I can tell you how I feel, I've made it
Yeah.
very apparent in the board meetings, or our work sessions, not board meetings, how I feel, so this won't come as a surprise to anybody who watches this tonight.
I have.
So I believe you were appointed originally and now you're running.
Yes.
And why do you want to do that again?
Because I'm a glutton for punishment.
I just wanna know why.
Just a little living, you know. You know, honestly, I've been told I have a servant's heart. I really believe in Holly Lake Ranch. I live here. My parents live here. I plan on dying here. And I feel like I have some things that I can contribute. I have some background in leadership and in accounting and things like that. And I feel like I've got something to add, and I want to continue to try to do so. And I think some people, well, most of the people that know me well know that I'm not afraid at all to stand up for what I believe in. And I don't go along just to go along.
Good answer.
Good.
And I had another
Well, that was the
question.
true, honest
Yeah,
answer.
just good answer.
I went through the budget that you're currently in now with a fine tooth comb last year.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that stood out to me was why is the HOA paying for credit card processing fees? I happen to work for a city, I have to budgets and things. If you pay by credit card, you're paying for that fee. Why does the ranch pay for that fee? You may not know, but I think it's a
You
lot of
know,
money to be paying.
I would agree with that. I know it's lower than it used to be. I think that's a very good question, and I hate to say this, but if you send that question to feedback@hollylakeinfo.com, because I'm not sure why we're paying them. I know, you know, I used to pay, and this is the truth, I pay my dues annually. I used to pay them by credit card. because I'd get the cash back, and then it hit me, what am I doing? I'm hurting our
Yes.
you know, our
I was
budget.
stunned to see that
Yeah.
it being paid by
That
the
it's
HOA.
not being charged
Yes.
back to the homeowners.
And I did ask, and I did receive an answer. I asked late, so there was no changes that could be made. I'd like to make sure it's looked at this year. And I was told that it benefited potentially that you would actually get the money because people then were, and they were able to pay via credit card. I personally don't agree with that. It was a high
Yeah,
dollar
send that to
amount.
feedback, and even since that's a budget-related question that I can actually look into at budgeting time, copy me on it.
Okay.
Because I can promise you right now, I don't know if you can tell I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm not
No,
gonna
you're
remember,
okay.
I'm not gonna remember
I
that you
didn't
asked me
wanna
that when I
call you
walked out
out
of
on
here.
it, but it is on there and it needs to be addressed, so.
Well, a lot of restaurants now are adding that. When you look at your receipt, you'll see
Oh, you have
a
to.
fee. Yeah, so.
Patron needs to pay for that. Convenience.
I'd like to know, what is your opinion on the feasibility study for the funding of the back gate, Section 8? It's a Nick question.
I know it is, and Nick knows how I feel about this. I think that before we can spend any money on this, and I've said this, that I think we need to have a survey that's indicative of the feelings of all the people on the ranch, not just the ones that have already been asked, because it's gonna be when it turns out to be an expense, it's gonna be an expense that not just the people in Section 8 will bear, it's gonna be an expense that everybody on the ranch will bear, so we need feedback from everybody. I'm sorry?
Kind of like pickleball courts.
Yes, ma'am. Like, or tennis courts, or golf courts, or,
That's an expense
I mean, courses.
that not everybody uses.
Yeah, but that
Exactly.
back gate is for safety issues. I mean, for ambulances to come in that can get there quicker, for fire trucks, for, you know, if you have to go out of it to get somewhere real fast. I mean, it's more of a safety issue. I think something should be done there.
right, I know that for a lot of like all of our emergency exits, we have some communication issues. And that was another thing that I brought up on my wish list. I would like to see us looking at trying to get some of those communication issues. When I say communication, I'm talking about internet, you know, Wi-Fi, whatever it takes to get back there. Trying to look at those for all of the emergency gates, because that would help the people back in Section 8, but it's not gonna help the people in Section
Right.
2. Or, you know, so we need to look at the connectivity, that's the word I was looking for, in all of the sections, not just in one section.
Yes, there was another question that specifically asked about emergency access and egress from each section is really important, and we're missing it several.
Right, that's true, and I think,
Yeah,
you
the
know,
one in, one out is the problem for me. It's like there's only one way in to where we live. There's only one way out to where we live. Why isn't there another access to get in and out?
well, and that's something it's gotta be listed as a priority. I think exit is more important, and when I say exit, you know, if we could get the emergency exits working so that people could get out, and working so that emergency vehicles could get in, because I live in Section 8, I live back in the middle of nowhere, and I'll tell you what, if I had an emergency, I would probably go to my parents' house and jump the fence, because their house backs up to Lylesville Road, but I also probably am not a very good fence jumper, so that might not be very successful.
Yeah, there was also another question about did the board just have an evaluation of this back gate thing? Did we just go through this, or did y'all just go through this, because I missed it? There was another question, did you already make a ruling?
At this point, a ruling was made to not move forward at this, because we only had 74 responses to the feedback, and it was determined that given that we only had that amount of response, which is not, to use an accounting term, a material number of responses, given the number of homes we out here, it was determined not to be a priority by this board. That doesn't mean that when the new board is seated, if we could, you know, that they might think differently. you know, the budgeting process goes through 2 boards, so.
So I just want to clarify, so the board determines the importance by how many emails they get to that email address. So it's really, really important that the questions go to the feedback email, because that's how it determines how urgent it is to the membership.
Well, and that's the way the feedback was requested last year.
Okay.
What we talked about is if we were gonna do this, do you remember last summer, I think it's before I was on the board, but they did a member survey
Yes.
about what do you like best, what do you like least, and use SurveyMonkey or something like that. I think that would be a better, indicator, because, and ask meaningful questions that are closed-ended, not, because it's very hard to quantify open-ended questions when you get 400 different responses to the same question. So it's easier, you know, would you be in favor of this if it was free? Would you be in favor of this if it cost $10,000? Would you be, you know, things like that. Because there's gonna be a point at which some people are gonna say, no, I live in section 2, I want one over here, I don't want one over there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
I have a question or a thought on the Section 8 gate. And it doesn't, I don't live back there, so it would not affect me, and I don't live in the back of the west side, but if you're gonna look at giving the east side back access, the west side is eventually gonna come to you and say, what about us? That's just a thought. My question is, as a board member right now, what is your thought on opening up the golf course for outside golf?
Just ask me a question as a board member, and I'd really rather answer as a candidate. Okay, as a candidate, as a resident, and I'm gonna tell you honestly, I have 2 thoughts on that. Do I think it will probably bring us more income? Probably so. Do I think there's a concern about people that, how would we keep the people that are coming in to play golf from just driving around and you know, using our roads and going fishing on our lake? I mean, even just bank fishing, you know? So we'd have to look at, because one of the big draws to living here is the fact that we live in a private gated community. So by opening up the golf course, are you making it so it's not private and gated anymore? Does that make sense? I think a lot more questions, we'd have to have a lot more information before we can make a decision on that.
That holds true with the restaurant as well, right?
That holds true with the restaurant as well, that's very true. And I'm not, am I supposed to be looking at the camera?
No,
Because I'm
no,
looking at,
no.
I don't know who has the microphone.
Do you believe that this is a member-driven or a board-driven membership?
You've asked me that question before.
Yes, I have.
I believe that, it should be a member-driven board. Should be a member-driven, you know, place, because I wasn't elected, I was appointed, and I know a lot of people don't know me, but we represent you. We're not just, you know, and so in order to do that, we have to listen to you. And sometimes that means, as I said earlier, I believe every question deserves an answer. I don't know how to resolve that issue. I can't promise you that it's gonna happen tomorrow, but I wanna work towards, and I think a lot of things could be resolved with just communicating more. You know, if we had more, and we've got to figure out how to do that, what that looks like. I mean, when I moved here in 2015, the first meeting I went to was one where people were offered to be escorted out the room if they spoke, and I looked at my husband and I said, what have we gotten ourselves into? You know, so we've come a long way since then, but are there improvements to be made? Definitely, definitely.
And I have one more question. So as you're the treasurer and you know what the budget is, how do you feel about Holly Lake Branch's budget being higher than the city of Gilmer?
You know, I've actually, after you talked to me about that the other day, I have the city of Gilmer's budget pulled up on my computer, and it's 93 pages long. And in the last 48 hours, I have not been able to go through those 93 pages. I did look at, there are a couple of, one big difference is that we have a golf course, and Gilmer doesn't have a golf course. And to the tune of about, between golf maintenance and pro shop and all that stuff, I wanna say it's like $650,000 total that we're spending on, on maintaining and upkeeping that golf course. So if you take that away, then our and am I wrong on that, Monica? Isn't that about the right number? I mean, and that includes salaries, that includes all sorts of different expenses, So if you take that away, the budgets get a lot closer. And if you take away the restaurant, the budgets get a lot closer. And we have about, I'd say 4,000 residents-ish. And there's, the population of Gilmer in 2020 was about 5,100. So I have been actually looking into this. I'm not just, but I do try to sleep sometimes. But I mean, I'm trying to figure out, to say it's bigger and it shouldn't be, we need to look at where the differences, the material differences lie, and where we could try to save some money.
Thank you.
So the other two candidates were asked about how they felt about 209. So that's been beat like a drum. Can you tell me how you feel about that, how you interpret 209?
Well, I have heard both sides of the story. It keeps me awake at night, and I mean this sincerely. I'm not. I've tried reading through the 209 to see what it says, and then I've read what the people that think we aren't following it have said, and I know what my previous HOA did. I want somebody to. I'm not an attorney. I said that I have no legal expertise, but when I read what our attorney has said and the questions that I've asked and the answers I've gotten, and they're telling me we're not breaking any laws, but then the other side says we are. Well, how do I know as an accountant, as a layperson, where the truth lies? Do I wish we could sit down and discuss it and try to figure that out? If there was some sort of mediation, something we could do, because I hate to see something like this tear apart a beautiful community. Because the people is what makes the community. But when you're at each other's throats for something like that, and I understand it, people are passionate about it both ways. But, did I answer your question?
Kind of, sort
No?
of.
Okay.
Not exactly.
It's okay.
No.
Well, but what,
Well, I asked you what's your interpretation of it, what you've read.
what I've read, and I've been presented with some new stuff recently, but what I've read is that you can't deny a member a right to vote. And I specifically asked our attorney if we're denying anybody the right to vote. And the answer was no, we're telling them how many votes they can get. So my tendency is to believe that until I see the other side. But I haven't, I haven't seen legal opinions on the other side. So I'm an analyzer. I like to read every single thing. That's why, when we talked about the city of Gilmer budget, obviously I've been paying attention because I know they don't have a municipal golf course. I know what their population is. I'm trying to look into this, but I have to go with what the people are telling me.
Right. So I got one other question. It's my understanding at a board meeting that you cannot ask a question. You can only make a comment. If you have a question, it has to go through feedback. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. How do you feel about that?
I feel like it gives y'all the message that we don't care and that we don't, and that makes me sad because I do care and I want to listen. One of the things I've said, my husband, when I first said I was deciding to run again, he said, well, you know what? When you put your announcement on Facebook, tell them where we live, tell them we spend all our time in the backyard by the fire pit and just come on by. Well, since then it's been 110 degrees and we're under a burn ban, so I didn't feel like that was probably the thing for me to do. But I mean that. I've spent 4 hours on the phone with residents who are explaining their feelings, and I feel like if we listened more, and communicated better, that a lot of this would not be as contentious amongst people.
Amen.
That's right.
You got that right.
Nick has his hand up.
Oh, here.
Let me make a quick question for you, Stacie. And thank you for coming tonight. And will you work to end, and this was brought from someone else, thank you for your comment on
In the board.
In the board
at
meetings.
yes, at the board meetings. It's like so irritating to listen to you guys say that again and again and again. Thank you for your comment, and then they go on.
Or we'll get back with you.
And they don't.
I have said multiple times tonight, and I mean this, I believe that every question deserves an answer. Can I promise you that that's going to end? No. Am I fighting for it? Yes. And that's all I can do. I mean, I remember one meeting Monica stood up and she asked a question and I didn't feel like it'd been answered well enough. Do you remember that? It was about, I don't remember what it was. And, you know, maybe I just missed something, so I tried to explain some more. And thankfully you said, no, I want to hear what she wants to say, because I feel like sometimes I add some value.
Is that based upon legal?
Oh, hi, Tom.
Hi, is that based upon legal advice, or is that just a style of this board? Thank you for your comment.
It is not based on any legal advice at all, to my knowledge. If it is, I have not gotten that advice.
Okay, I got a couple of questions about the voting.
Okay.
So, the board has raised the dollar amount for voting it to 250,000, if I'm correct. It used to be at 100,000, but at 100,000, it seemed like they would break the project up into a couple of different phases to bypass that. 250 is a pretty large amount. What's your take on lowering that to try to keep the board from going around vote to build what they want?
4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. You know, I am certainly not against that. I mean, I think with inflation, maybe I don't know. I know it was changed. I know there are a lot of bad feelings about that. It was before I was on the board. I don't know the history, but I would certainly say if enough people think it needs to be changed, then it's something we should look at. I mean, that's all I can say. I'd like to hear, you know, I don't know of any projects since I've been on the board that have been broken down into smaller pieces just to avoid that vote.
Okay, and so talking about the voting, people, you know, right now we vote 1 vote per association number. And they said, well, if me and my wife are on the deed, then we should have 2 votes. Well, who's to stop someone from putting 10 people on their deed?
Yeah.
Well, and that's a very valid point, and I know that there are strong feelings on both sides of that. The only thing I would say is, again, every neighbor, or the HOAs one that I lived in for almost 20 years, that's why we did it. And that would be a concern if we changed it, because, you know, I've got single ladies, or I've got a single gentleman that lives right around the corner from me, and, you know, in my opinion, Craig and I shouldn't have more votes than he does, because we own the same amount of property. Okay. Do I get
Right here.
You mentioned the feedback thing, the link that we do our feedback on. Who checks and balances that and says the number is 74 people that were, like, who does that and how do we find out?
Well, I know on the feedback about the back gate itself, they printed. Well, right now I know that those go to 2 or 3 different people in the audience, not the audience, the administration office, and they send them forward. I know the feedback on the back gate itself. I got copies of the 74 emails. So
like the feedback about the land deal that's coming up and being signed on 8/8, we don't know what the feedback on that is.
we just got it yesterday, because I think yesterday was suspense date for the feedback, and I know it's 20 pages and I printed it out, but I haven't had a chance to read it all yet.
I think a lot of people think that falls on deaf ears, the feedback.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to change that, and I've asked the question, I said, because sometimes people stand up at meetings and they're asking on behalf of 30 neighbors of theirs, and I said, well, what if 30 people have the same question? And the answer was, well, then 30 people need to send an email. And I think if that started happening, that maybe we might be harder pressed to look for a better way to answer those questions.
Do you think if we had more town halls, you might eliminate a whole lot of these problems? Because we would have the right to just ask and get answers.
That's certainly a suggestion. I mean, I don't know how many town halls we could have. I think if we just communicated better, found better ways to communicate. I don't think there's any nefarious
Right now, the
intent.
board doesn't communicate with us at all.
Well, other than the quarterly newsletter,
Yeah, but that's not communicating. That's
well,
not.
I know.
There's a difference.
I understand that.
Okay,
Is my time
got
up?
one question and then it's time.
Okay, I have one follow-up question. We were talking earlier about like opening up where people could come in and play golf.
Uh-huh.
Or maybe could come into the ranch and go to the restaurant, and a lot of people poo it because they say, well, then we got people that are running around the ranch. What I'd like to know is how many contractors do we have coming to this ranch? And how many people are coming to stay at the Holiday Inn? And I can guarantee you the contractors are not monitored because I've seen them fishing.
Yeah.
So if the contractors, which I don't know what the number is.
Yeah, and I don't, that would be I don't know the numbers either, but that is a very valid point that I hadn't
don't see
thought
why
of.
there's an issue with letting somebody into the restaurant now to help our income, because we're letting in hundreds of people every day, and they do go to the restaurant, they do go to the lake. I don't know if they play golf, but they're all over the ranch. And then somebody has a garage sale and they call in 50 people. So they're all allowed to come in.
Good point.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.